cooperation.
Okay. Yeah. I hope you can see the screen. Here, yeah, yeah. Here, what we have done is, so I'm just written the statement, but the statement does nothing because we haven't added into a log or we haven't used any variable here. So, but in this statement, I have written console log and I'm putting that expression uh, right into that uh, console function. Sorry, log function. So it's going to say 1 plus 2, which is equal to 3. The output would be 3 because it's a computation. So, but in case of you can actually convert this thing into a string itself, but it's not going to do any computation. Uh, so I'm just giving you an example how strings can contain all kinds of values. It's not only restricted to alphabets. It can contain all kinds of value. It can contain any languages or anything. Yeah, here once I save it, you'll be able to see in the browser it's going to throw me 1 plus 2. It's not going to make the computation. Only if the values are given directly, it's going to compute it. I'm saving this. Yeah, you can see that the browser says it's 3. So I think yeah, I think this is much easier to see. Is the console properly visible?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
So so next we will see. Yeah, I'm just going to throw in these expressions inside a console log just to see how the computation is happening. I'm cutting that, pasting it in, saving it, adding what the lines for these two expressions, pasting it, here, saving it. It's going to automatically format and remove those extra semicolons for me. And also you can see on the right we have these values which are computed from the statements which we are given here. So yeah, 5 into 7, 35, and 9 minus 2, and also 1 for 2 by 2. But what if this 2 by 2 is not a regular division? What if that is using by 6? So in this case what happens is it's going to convert this value into a floating point which is with the decimals, because yeah, the resultant of this computation is going to be a float value, not a integer. So the interpreter, we call the thing which is running this JavaScript code as the interpreter. uh, Maybe that's how I say it, or sometimes it is referred as runtime. So here what it does is on the fly it's computing whether this value is going to result in an integer or a float, because you can see now it's saying as yeah, 0.333, but in case of 2 by 2 it could have thrown us the output of 1.000, considering all the values to be a floating value, instead of trying to find whether it is an integer or a float. So it's actually doing that for us. So when I save it, yeah, uh, it's going to be a floating point value. But then we are claiming it to be a number string, or it is true. But how would we identify that? So one of the ways in which you can identify is using something called as a type of. So inside type of, you can put this expression or any kind of data here. So I'm not sure if this works. I think you can write it like this, but the type of is a little weird. So type of is actually one of the type of is one of the keywords. You cannot use it at some places. You can only use it for this purpose. So when I just put type of, it's not going to do anything because we are not using the result which is coming out of this type of. So when I type console.log and throw in this type of inside this parenthesis, which is to pass in something, when I save it, it's going to show me that it is a number. So type of 1 plus 2 results in a number. Even if we do that for 2 by 2, I told you everything is a number here. So when I save it, it's actually a number. And in case of a string, taking this text and this. Now you can see that type offs, and I'm sending it this value. So it is going to tell me that this value is a string. Yeah. So however you put it, whether you put it in a backtick or in a single quote, it's going to call it as a string. So that is how you will find the type of this value. Then, yeah, in similar way, let's put true here, and I'm saving it. It's going to say it is a boolean. So these are the three main types. We have one more thing called as a big int, which is not widely used. It's, I think, relatively new. It's represented by using an n. So when you precede any value with n, it's going to consider it as big int. Okay, I've just consoled it, and you also can see that it's having a different color here. So I'm going to use this type of to put this value inside that. So I'm going to remove this and put one n. It's going to say me it is a big int. So which is like a big number. You can have a number of any number of digits inside this variable. So this value can contain any number of digits. But in case of numbers, at some after some point it tries to say that this number cannot fit in. Yeah. So but begin is not big. Even I haven't used it even once. Yeah, those are the basic data types. These are called as primitive data types because primitive types are actually faster. They are directly stored in memory and computed by using the assembly code itself. But we have something called as non-primitive types, which are the object types. We will talk about object later in this session or probably tomorrow. So objects are called as non-primitive because they are not regular values and they cannot be directly understood by the machine. Like, I mean, by the assembly language. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you guys got the part where I was talking about this semicolon. So semicolon is just used for ending that specific statement. So when the statement ends, you have to use a semicolon, but it's actually not necessary in JavaScript. It's actually mandatory in other languages such as C, C++, and Java, but it is not mandatory in JS. But when I remove it and save it, my formatter is actually adding that semicolon for me. So yeah, it's not mandatory. Even if I use it without semicolon, it's going to work. It is just a good practice to use semicolons just to see the thing more clearly. Sometimes when you don't use semicolon, uh, the statements won't look proper. Yeah. So this covers some basics, and I'm going to start with variables. We saw that what is a variable using that illustration. Does anyone have any question on that from this illustration? I'm waiting for an answer. Yeah, okay. I need someone to answer by unmuting.
Yeah, it's clear.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, let's move to variables. So basically, as I said, variables are something which you will use to throw in your value and let it hold that value for you. It is going to be helpful most of the time. Yeah, not most of the time. It's going to be helpful all the time, but it's not necessary that you use them everywhere. So you saw that I've used statement here without any variable. Uh, so it's going to work, but this is not of any use to you. We're just printing out values directly, and it's not having any purpose at all. So most of the console logs, yeah, no, not most, no, all of the console log statements you're going to use only for debugging purposes, whether the code that we have written is working properly or not. So how to create a variable is you have to use a keyword called as var, and var, and you have to tell that this is a variable. So this var just tells that whatever is coming up next is a variable, and that variable is going to hold that value. So this variable name should be meaningful. So let's say, yeah, a simple case would be, let's say, multiplication of 2 with 5. So that is what my variable is going to mean. It's actually quite big. So it is good to have huge, very descriptive variable names, where if you see that variable itself, you will be able to understand what it is going to hold. So I have created a variable. So this is called as declaration. If you had read anything in the basic languages, so this is called as a declaration, where you are creating a variable, and when I immediately pass in a value to it, I'm going to pass, since this variable says multiplication of 2 with 5, so 2 into 5. So I'm going to pass in this expression directly into this variable. So equal to, yeah, means it's called as an assignment, where you are assigning the value on the right. It could be any value. We'll see multiple types of values which you can assign. So we are assigning this value on the right to the value, to the variable which is on the left, to this equal to sign. So this is called as an assignment operator. Equal to is called as an assignment operator, which helps us to assign values to a variable. So we are assigning this value of 2 into 5 into this variable. So what happens is, this is from right to left. The execution is from right to left. So in this case, I think you probably know how that precedence thing works, right? We have this BODMAS rule, where we have an expression, and it knows which one to compute first, like the multiplications are done first. In similar way, in languages too, certain things happen from left to right and right to left. So in this, yeah, in these statements, you can see that we have this console.log. So here it does console dot log. It should know that what this console dot log means, and then only it can do this thing on the right. So but here it will look at the whole line. It will see, okay, this is var and this is a variable name, but at the end we have something where we have to do a computation. So only if you do this computation, it's going to be saved into this variable. So 2 into 5 after getting computed, which is 10, is going to be saved into multiplication of 2 with 5. So now what we can do is, instead of just previously we were just putting the values directly into the console log statement, but now we are going to use this variable and throw it here. So when I save it, it's actually going to print that result and value here. So that's how you would use a variable. So var is a keyword. uh, you have to use var appropriately. You cannot misuse it. So by misuse I mean you cannot use var as a variable name itself. You can see that it's showing an error. Var is not allowed as a variable declaration name because it is a keyword. So keywords cannot be used for these purposes. Keywords are restricted only for the purpose they are meant to be used for. So, so var is one of the ways in which you can create a variable. We have multiple other ways. We have something called as a let, which is going to be 90% similar to var. Let's say, yeah, 90% similar to var. I can do the same thing. I'm trying to use that same thing here and bring it a value, saving it. Now you can see we actually have an error here. That is because this variable is already used. Okay, the identifier, yeah, multiplication of 2 with 5 has already been declared. So I told you that declaration is is creating that variable, and assigning it a value is called as initialize, and assigning it a value immediately is called as initialization. So we have declared a variable and initialized with the value, which sometimes, yeah. What I'm trying to do is I'm creating another variable, but instead of using var, I'm using let. I'm creating another variable. Uh, this variable is also trying to use that same name as the previous one we created. So it is just saying that you are reusing that name. You cannot do that. You can do this at some places. We will get to know that in future. But as of now, yeah, you cannot use it in this way. You cannot directly write two variables, declare two variables, and hope them to have two same names. So yeah, and as you can see also the value on right, this variable does not know what it is holding, because if you see this variable and thought that it's going to hold 2 multiplied with 5, you're wrong, because we did not name it properly with 9. Yeah. So now when I save it, it's not going to throw any error because the names are different now. I've saved it. So we have only printed this, so that's why it's printing out this. I'm going to make a new line and copy this name and put it here. Save it. Now we can see that it printed out 450, which is the result of multiplying these two numbers. So this is a variable. We also have one more way in which you can create a variable, but this is going to be quite different from var and let. Var and let are so much similar. There is some key difference, uh, which is very important. And I would also say always use let instead of var. So var is something introduced very like long before, that is like in the core language itself, but it got replaced because of some issues which we were facing because of var. Now it is preferred only to use let. So there's one more type called as const, which is to, I think you can understand it from the name. Const is to show something which is going to be constant. So let's say, let's say something which is constant. Yeah. So what it's going to hold is area of square with side of 2. So what the area of square is computed by is 2 into 2 would give the area of a square where the side is 2. So this variable is actually a constant because this value won't change whatever happens. So if you can see with the name itself, it's for the side having a value of 2. We have computed an area, so this area value is going to be the same. It's not going to change at all, so it has no reason to change. And that is when you will be naming it with the const. So I'm trying to print that here, copy, paste, saving it. Now you can see 4 here. Yeah, the difference between these two are uh, so I can take multiplication with 50, like I can say it as instead of 50 I'm typing it as 5, which is actually totally overriding this variable's meaning. But now I added a statement where, so I've already declared this variable. You have to declare it only once and you can use it any number of times. So I've just changed its value from 15 to 9 by 5 into 9. So I'm going to save it. We have already added this in the console log statement. I'm saving it. Once I save it, so now we can see instead of 450, it's showing 45 because we have just overridden the value which was previously there in this variable by using the assignment operator. But when I try to do the same here for a constant variable, going to throw an error. Let's say I'm going to throw in the same value or whatever it is. When I save it, you will be seeing this error. So assignment to a constant variable. Yeah, this is one of the errors which will be thrown when you try to reassign a value to this constant by using this equal to. So there are in the ways in which you will be able to modify values in there will be able there you will be able to modify the values inside this constant variable. But that is not done by using this assignment operator. That is done by using a different way. We'll talk about that later. So as of now, remember that you cannot reassign. So you have already assigned a value to this variable. You cannot reassign if you have used const for that variable. Yeah, that's how it works. So uh, yeah, I'm just removing this line. But in case of var and let, you can reassign them any number of times. You can change their value in any ways. It can be a string, it can be a, so here we are having a number, but when I try to reassign it, I can actually assign a string to it and it's going to work because JavaScript is not so strict about these types. So this is what I meant by dynamic typing. I'm not specifying its type here. So we know that the type of multiplication is going to be integer, but there is no such thing called as int and a variable name. It means that you have to only store integer value into this variable, but we don't have any such thing in JavaScript. It's actually, this is what I meant by saying dynamically typed language. So the types are going to be computed dynamically on the fly. So yeah, here you can see that I actually changed the type which it was previously holding. It knew that the type it was holding is number because that's how the browser printed it. But then when I changed it to a string, still it worked. So in dynamically it is computed. So this is about the variables. Let me show you another thing about variables. Yeah, this is what we saw previously. So yeah, I have two questions which may be silly, but then that is used for proving the point here. Yeah, but someone needs to answer it. I hope you can see this. I actually don't have any proper way to zoom this. you can zoom your browser window. I want someone to answer. We saw that we have this box which is a variable which is holding some value, and so this is a room which is closed with the door here, and you are outside of this room. So will you be able to see that box? It does not have any windows or anything. It's a completely closed room with only one door. If you're getting other ideas, I need someone to answer. So will you be able to see that box from outside that room?
No, sir.
Okay,
No,
great. Yeah.
No.
So okay, super. Thank you. So that is what we call as scope. So yeah, if you are playing PUBG, you obviously know what is a scope. Scope allows you to look far from what you can see normally. So if you have a 2x scope or a 4x scope, it's going to increase the visibility area of what you can see. In this same scenario, what we have here is we have a room, and you cannot see what is inside the room until you go in. Uh, in same way, we have a concept called as scope, where the variables are there in a specific scope, and only in that scope you'll be able to access it. And once you come out of the scope, you won't be able to look into it. Like, yeah, in the same case, if you walk into that room, you'll be able to see that box, but if you come out, you won't be able to see it. Let's see an example for that. So in the languages, how scope is created is by using a curly braces. So when I put a curly brace, and here you saw that I've actually added this variable. I've used it in console log and it worked. Now I'm going to create a new variable here, let's say temporary variable, and mostly it not name anything as temporary, because nobody will be able to understand what it's holding. It's all about writing your code clean. So it's a ever learning practice. You have to keep learning it every day. So that's not going to change. So always try to keep it short as much as possible, but more precise of what it is. So temporary, I'm putting it as, let's say, 100. I'm saving it. So I've created a scope by using curly braces. You'll see much more where these curly braces are used, but I'm now showing you how to create a scope. This is how the scope will be created everywhere in the code. And I'm going to log this as of up till now. I had been typing console.log, which is pretty tedious. When I type log, it's going to give me the shorthand, which when click, or yeah, you can press enter, it's going to type console.log. And I'm typing temporary in it, saving it, and you can see that we have this 100. Let's say, let's keep it a big number so that it will be able. Yeah, we can see this number which is inside the scope, and I can print it out. But now what I'm going to do is, so this variable is inside the scope, and I'm going to print that outside here. Now we can see that temporary is not defined. So this is what I talked about in that image, where this is the scope, which is actually the room in that example. Only if you are in that room, you will be able to look into that value. But once I've looked into that variable, to be precise, once when I get out of that room, I don't have access to that variable. So that's why when I'm trying to print it here, it's actually throwing an error. So this is the example of a scope. I also have one more example, but I want you all to remember that. In I think I'll be asking you the same in future, but I want you all to remember that. Yet another silly question. So yeah, we have two places here. One is home and the other is hospital. Where would you ideally perform a surgery? I need someone to answer.
Hospital.
Yeah, thank you. So
Hospital, sir.
yeah, so this is sorry, this is actually called as context. So context means the context, even if you know the meaning of the word, uh, it means it talks about the environment in which some function is happening. So if you're performing a surgery, it has to be in a hospital. Yeah, that's why I used ideally. You can say that it can also be done home. So the ideal situation is you would always do it in a hospital. So this context refers to the environment in which you are performing a certain action. Yeah, we will look into what is context in deep, which is a pretty confusing concept for some people. uh, you will I'll try to explain it in a way which you will understand. Yeah, so we have this error. So it's you can only access it from the scope, and also only after creating the variable you will be able to access it. You cannot access it before its creation. Even if you have this line here, see, it says you cannot access temporary before its creation. It says initialization. Since this variable is created, when I remove this and save it, temporary is not defined. That's what it's going to say. But since it sees that there is a variable but it's not initialized before the statement, it gives you a different error. So you can access something only after it is created. There is one case here which we'll talk later. Yeah, I think we have covered some basics here. Let me quickly talk about, I think we have only 15 minutes. Let's quickly talk about what is a function. We saw a function here. uh, we are going to write a function now. If, uh, yeah, I have proper time, let me try to show you an example with the page, since I haven't shown you anything relating to the page. Yeah, so the way in which you can create a function is similar to a variable. Instead you should use something called as a function, which is also a keyword, and which is followed by another name. Let's say this function is going to do uh, add two numbers. Yeah, and I told you about the scope, right? So this is where this will be used. So whatever this function is going to do is should be wrapped inside a curly brace. So what this function is going to do is add two numbers, but you need two numbers, right? So those go in this curly braces. So this is where the variable and a function differs. So a function will have a curly brace. That is because you will be passing in parameters for it. So we the function says add two numbers. So it means we would need two parameters. So I'm going to call it as number one, and you can specify multiple parameters by using comma. Number two. So this function is, yeah, ideally going to ultimately going to return to summation of two numbers. So I'm adding this statement called as return number one plus number two and saving it. So we haven't used this function yet. We have just created this function, which is called as defining a function. So this part underneath is called as a function definition. So I'm using this function's name. I'm going to call it console.log. I'm going to call this function add two numbers. So when I just if I print this exactly like this, it's going to show me it as a function. I hope you guys understand that we haven't called this function, we are just printed out this function itself. So that's what is returned here. So, and also when I use type of for this, you'll be able to see that it is a function. Yeah. When I put type of on this add two numbers, it says as a function. When I pass values to this function, it's going to return me the result which I'm expecting. So add in the similar way where I've given the parameters, I'll be sending the arguments now. There is there is a difference between what is a parameter and an argument, which is but usually used interchangeably because people will get that. So if 5 and 10, when I save it, you'll be able to see that we get the result of 15, which is actually getting computed in this function. So what I'm doing is I'm calling this function. I'm calling this function called as add two numbers, where it is receiving two arguments. Uh, the first argument is 5 and the second is 10, and all it does is it's going to add number 1 and number 2 and return it. So I'm going to remove this and save it. Now we can see that instead of seeing the 15, we are actually seeing undefined. Undefined is actually a special type which is considered as a data type, which is a special kind of thing which exists, I think, only in JS. None other languages have undefined. So undefined just means that this is not defined. So what we have done is we just remove that return statement, which makes that this function is not returning anything. So if it is not returning anything, the ideal value would be undefined. So undefined is not only in these places. Whenever you don't pass in something, it's going to be undefined. Let's say I'm returning this value, I can see 15, and I'm printing out these two numbers, number 1 here and number 2 in the next line. Okay, we see that you can see the two numbers 5 and 10, but it's actually pretty, I would say, if you see this, you won't be able to understand what those numbers are. It's actually good to always put some other text next to the value to clearly able to understand what you have printed out. So here I can use comma, and I'm putting a string and saying it is number 1, and here I'm seeing it as number 2, so that when it prints out, this is how it's going to look like. So when you're using multiple console log statement, everything is going to be in a different line, but if you're using values comma separatedly, it's going to have a space in between and print out the things. So here we saw that we have number 1, and then we have this string called as number 1, just to let us identify what is printed out in this line. So because you can see we have printed a lot of things here, but you don't know from where it is coming and what it means. So now we know that we are seeing this as the first argument of our function, which is number 1. So we see these two values. Let's say I'm removing the second value here, but it is expecting two values, and we are also trying to print the second value here. Now when I save it, what happens is, it actually says that this value is undefined. You can see that number 2 is shown as undefined. That is because it automatically assumes, since that number is not passed into this function, it assumes that value as undefined. The same case as in happens in variables too. I can declare this variable but not use it. Let's say, let's call it as temp, and I have not assigned any value to it. So previously we saw that all the variables are having values, but we haven't assigned any values to it. But here I'm going to do that. I'm not assigning any value. Okay, I'm not assigning any value. I'm just going to print it, and let's say temp. Let's say this is called the temp variable, and saving it. Now you can see that the temp variable says it is undefined. So undefined is a type when undefined is a value which is assigned whenever there is no definition provided. There is no value assigned to a variable, or whenever there is no argument passed into that function. So that is when you will find undefined. So undefined is actually a special type, because when I put type of, the weird thing, when I put type of temp and save it, its result is also going to be undefined. But I'm not sure if you see this difference. This is actually the value of undefined, and here we are seeing the type of value, which is a string, which says undefined. This is undefined itself. So how you use these numbers, strings as value. Undefined is also a value. You can say undefined. Yeah, you can see the color difference here, right? When I save it, yeah, okay, you won't be able to see the difference. I can directly put that into the console itself. Defined. Yeah, saving it. You can see it throws as undefined. You can see this color difference, right? This means the value itself, and this is actually a string which says its type. So type of undefined is actually undefined, which is quite weird. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Don't bother about it. So here I'm going to pass that value properly. I'm saving it. We have this variable. I'm removing this temporary variable. Yeah, we saw about undefined, and we saw about a function. So a function should return something. If it is not return, there are two types of functions. One is a function which has a side effect, or a function should do a computation. So side effect is a function which does something with the variables which has around it, and a function which does a computation is going to return something. Here it's doing a computation and it returns something. But there are functions which do not return something, but it does a certain action which is going to have an impact. Yeah, we will you will get to know the difference when you start writing functions. Here we have just added two numbers, and we also saw that when I remove this and save it, it's going to go undefined because I'm not returning this. So return statement is mandatory if you are actually uh, if you actually need something from this function. Yeah, that's how you write a function. I think, yeah, I think that's it for the day. We'll have a lot more ground to cover tomorrow. So, do you guys have any questions, or do you want me to repeat something here, or something that you did not get from what I have told? You can ask it. We have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, 2 3 minutes, last 2 3 minutes. Meet will get in.
Okay, okay, yeah. Is it?
What's the use in doing this code in console?
Yeah, the only purpose is to see what has happened. Let's say, uh, I'm just commenting.